Hello and welcome to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. Make sure you find the Raptors Show wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, and please rate and review the show. Reminder, we're streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel and airing live on Sportsnet 360 Monday to Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. I'm your host, William Liu, and for today, I am joined by two friends of mine, Joe Scasharo to my right, Joe Wolfon to my left. What's going on, guys?
For this season, that's practically the mountaintop.
Listen, if they win one more, they will have done something they have not done all season. So
yeah, they haven't done 3 in a row this year, eh?
They have not.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. It's been half a season. We're officially at the 41 game mark for the Raptors. 5 games under, disappointing for sure. But the vibes are obviously a little bit better. Maybe just like not as like viciously bad as it had been like last month or so, because they have come off of 2 wins here. And look. Obviously, beating one of the worst teams in the league is not something to like reinvent the whole season. And to be honest, I didn't even feel like the Raptors played defense outside of maybe like 4 or 5 possessions in the fourth quarter. I think they could do a lot better on that front. But I wanted to start with last night's win and the positives. And Raptors hitting season high 23s. Joe Wolfond, are you surprised? Have you seen that out of the Raptors? There were entire weeks where the Raptors didn't hit 23s, so that's got to be a positive.
By definition, we have not seen that out of the Raptors this season. It was a season high, but games like that are going to happen, right? Where you get hot and knock down threes, and I think, I don't know, did you notice a huge difference in terms of the quality of shots that they were creating? Maybe a little bit, but I feel like if anything, that probably had more to do with the Hornets' defense and like their complete inability to contain the ball at the point of attack. And I think the Raptors did a good job of taking advantage of that. They were penetrating and spraying the ball out and moving it and getting some good looks. But, like we saw in the Cleveland game where they just went bananas from 3, it's like that's going to happen sometimes, but it's not something that you can bank on. Like ultimately we have a big sample size, like a half season's worth of evidence to tell us that this is not a good jump shooting team. So that doesn't mean that they're going to be a bad jump shooting team every single game, but it's not going to be a bankable formula for success moving forward.
Yeah, and with respect to your comment about whether they were actually creating better looks or not, I'd argue the looks that they've been creating all season have been fine. Like, there are obviously issues with the half-court offense and with shot creation in general for certain players, but on the whole, as an offense, I think even if you look at a lot of sites that track like shot quality, right? Like if you just shot the average NBA percentage from where and how you're getting your shots, I think the Raptors are like 10th, 11th. So the shot qualities they're getting are fine. It's the fact that they're not making them, between the roster construction issues and then also because the guys that you expect to make them haven't been making them. So at this point, it's almost like I'm not as impressed anymore when they're creating the good looks. I just need to, it's like I'm at the point where I need to see it to believe it, that they will actually make the good looks that they're creating.
Yeah.
Even when good shooters are taking them.
There aren't that many good shooters is the thing, right? And it's like, how do you define shot quality? Like a lot of it has to come down to who's actually taking the shots. And if defenses aren't concerned about the players on the Raptors that are taking those shots, and if they feel a lot better about just crowding the paint and making sure Pascal can't get to his spots, then I don't know. Are you really creating good shots, or are you doing exactly what the defense wants you to do at the end of the day?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, that's fair. And I think last night, the ball movement was okay, obviously. Again, I think it's closer to your point where the Hornets just like offensively or defensively, they just don't have any cohesion. Maybe as a team on both ends, I was so unimpressed both ways.
They're Rockets East, man. They play a lot of dumb basketball.
Basically. Who's going to be their Austin Rivers to be like, hey, imagine being told by Austin Rivers, yo, you guys got to play the right way. That's tough. But yeah, I mean, just watching them though, I did think that the shot quality was slightly better just because I think Fred took on a floor general type of role, right? I thought Scottie was, once again, not necessarily looking for his own shot, but made passes out quickly. It was interesting watching him work the pick and roll a couple of times. It's sort of just him rolling to the basket and then spraying the passes back out. So, but I mean, ultimately, it really is just a case of guys who hadn't been making shots this season, making a lot of those shots. And look, there is a case for the fact that the Raptors have been really snake bitten with how poorly they've been shooting the 3. I was reading the Tim Bontemps article that he wrote when he came down to Toronto for a week and wrote this whole big thing. And one of the big takeaways he had was just like the Raptors were shooting like 6 percentage points worse per game on 3s, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're taking like 30 to 35 threes, 6 percentage points is like a substantial number. We're talking about 3 or 4 points per game. That is a big margin that determines a lot of these possessions. So, I thought that was going to be a little bit positive. But okay, I'm going to try the next positivity quote at you guys. The season high 32 assists, only 4th time this year the Raptors have recorded 30-plus assists, which means 1 in every 10 games so far they record 30-plus assists. Scottie with 7, Pascal with 7, Freddie with 8. Cash, yeah, I mean, just overall, I mean, the way they moved the ball last night, did you see any improvements that sort of led to that, or was it mostly just shot making and that leading to a higher assist total?
Again, I think the biggest key was shot making, because you're going to make shots for assists to be recorded. But I'd say if we're talking positives and talking about the playmaking side of things, I think you have to talk about Scottie Barnes, because this is something I tweeted last night too, where it's like there were a lot of games through this first half of the season where Scottie Barnes would finish with something like 7 points and only 5 field goal attempts, and it would be because he was just weirdly invisible for 80% of the game. Last night was not a case of that. Last night was a really, really good Scottie Barnes performance that 7 points, 7 assists, and 5 field goal attempts does not accurately describe.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that's a positive for the Raptors. The fact that I'd say the last 3-4 weeks, I'd say probably going back to that Cleveland game before the Christmas break. And I know he's had some rough games since then, but since that game, I think he's shown a lot of the same signs that he showed last year. And yeah, there's been a few games in between where, he hasn't shown it until the fourth quarter, but I do think you're starting to see the consistency with him again a little more often. And I do think there are positive signs outside of even his bigger scoring nights, like last night, where he's impacting the game no matter what his final stats look like. And I think he was doing that last year as a rookie, and that's what was so impressive. And he wasn't doing that this year, right? And so I think, again, if you're looking for positives outside of just, hey, they made shots on a lot of the same looks they've been getting all year, I think Scottie has to be Exhibit A.
Yeah, what have you made of Scottie in this role? I mean, I've been talking about it a lot, but I think it's pretty significant in terms of like what, this rookie of the year, who obviously one day down the line will probably become like a franchise player for this team. His growth and tracking in this second year right now, he is playing a lot of this sort of like point center role, kind of distributing. And yeah, Wolfond, what do you make of sort of his fit in that specific role right now? We know it's a bit of a compromise, but at the same time, he's had some positive showings, I think.
I think it's been really interesting to watch him kind of diagnose the different types of coverages that he's seeing now, like the deep drops that teams are throwing at him. With him playing center, he's getting guarded by centers, and they're sagging way off of him. And I think we've kind of seen him in real time process how to best attack that coverage. And like a perfect microcosm of that was the Bucks game, where he scored 0 points for the first 43 minutes of the game, and then did basically all of the Raptors scoring in the back half of the fourth quarter and overtime, because he sort of just started taking the space and attacking Brook Lopez at the rim. And there have been other games where he's used that space to pivot into dribble handoffs and work as a screener and get the ball moving side to side. And I think that's just been really fascinating, because one of the things that at the end of last season, I was just so curious about, and what was so fascinating about Scottie Barnes as a player looking ahead, was I had no idea what type of player he was going to grow into. It seemed like there were so many different directions that he could go. There still are. But when you talk about him being a point center, it's like, is that going to be as sort of like a poor man's Giannis type, who's handling the ball and running a lot of inverted pick and roll, or like it's 4 out and he's just sort of driving the ball into the paint? Right now he's obviously nowhere near that level. Like he doesn't have the ball handling chops. He doesn't have the kind of on the move playmaking, I don't think, to make that happen in the half court. Maybe that's still on the cards for him, but right now it almost seems more like the Marc Gasol role that I feel like some people wanted to see a little bit more from him, like a Domantas Sabonis almost, where he's operating in the middle of the floor and kind of running through all these different reads and options, where he is getting the ball moving side to side, where he is getting more guys involved and working as a wheel greaser. And, that's a role that I could see him growing into as well. And maybe it's a hybrid where he's doing a little bit of both. But I think the fact that we're seeing him do this and get comfortable doing this against, a dramatically different coverage than we've seen him face, like in the early part of the season, I think that's a good sign. And you would like to see the scoring output tick up in conjunction with that. But in terms of just, facilitating quality half-court offense, I think it's been encouraging.
Yeah, and I think even though obviously they're very different players, I'm not comparing their total styles. I do think I've seen a little bit of Draymond offensively in the way that Scottie can kind of tilt a defense from side to side. Like a possession is going one way, and the ball will get to Scottie in the middle, and he's almost reading in real time what's happening and switching things on the fly and getting the ball to the other side. And now the Raptors are running this completely different action, and it ends up working, but it's all because of Scottie's, I guess, quick decision to kind of get the offensive possession and the opposing defense going the other way. And it's something you see Draymond do a lot, where he'll do it like 15 times a game and there's nothing really to track it, but you see how it does affect the opposing defense and also how it keeps a possession that maybe is stalling out going.
Yeah.
That decisiveness is really the key to that, though, right? Like,
I thought yesterday he was very quick with his passes.
Totally. And early on, when he was seeing that kind of coverage for the first time, I thought he was really indecisive, and it was an absolute killer. You know, so many Raptors possessions were just grind to a halt because he wasn't making those decisions quick enough. And seeing him get more comfortable doing that, again, I think is a good sign. But it's also, I would love to see it in like an offensive environment that's more conducive to that. Like you,
So what do you mean
at,
by that? Like more shootings?
Well, yeah, and movement shooting in particular, right?
Okay,
Like the reason that it works so well with Draymond in Golden State is like they can really use that. You know, Caitlin Cooper, who writes about the Pacers, talks about negative spacing, right? Which is what the Pacers did for a long time with Domantas Sabonis, where, okay, you're pitching the ball to the center who's kind of operating as the hub from the elbow, and his defender's playing way off of him. You have movement going around him and cuts and guys like coming off for the DHOs. But if you don't have the movement shooting, then it's not going to really get the defense moving. Like they're not going to care. But if you have Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Jordan Poole coming off of those dribble handoffs, well, then that's really going to punish a defender for sagging back, right?
Yeah.
And the Raptors don't really have that right now. I mean, they have Gary Trent and you would hope Fred VanVleet, but if guys are shooting the way that they've been shooting this season, then I think they're still going to run into challenges.
Yeah, and you know what? I think for Scottie too is just like it's about him adapting to each specific moment, right? Because it's not like he was drafted to a team, you know, like the Rockets that we talked about, or even like the Hornets, for example, where if you get put on these teams, you got the ball in your hands, and it doesn't even matter necessarily if you win or not. We're just trying to get you to workshop through everything, and we're gonna eat the losses, right? And the games don't matter. He got drafted into a winning team with a winning culture, with a winning environment, with a bunch of guys who have literally won titles, and you know they're trying to continue that winning. And so when that is happening, you have to adapt like your role specifically to what's going to happen, you know, for the Raptors to actually win these games. And so when we're sort of describing the role right now, we're not saying that long-term Scottie's going to be, you know, a center, right? I don't think that at all, really. I think that the more he develops his ball handling, the more that the roster continues to change, he can sort of pivot into different roles. And the fact that he's able to adapt is actually a really promising sign for me. At the same time, though, I'm also, you know, been very curious to sort of track how it's working, because to be honest, the Raptors are very much in this moment where they're like, there's this urgency to win these games and to maybe see if they can sort of not save the season, but show enough as a roster where the team and the management chooses to keep it together rather than breaking it apart. So at that point, it's really just about winning. When you go through everybody's quotes, you know, I was just down at practice, everyone just talks about how hard they got to play towards winning right now. And I think this is a role that I think everyone has been fairly happy with Scottie playing on the team, on the coaching staff, and of course down the line. And even within the course of games, you'll probably see a lot more scoring. But I actually had no issues with how he played last night. It was perfectly fine. You know, I think the other thing that's been interesting is the last two games, the Raptors bench has been a positive. In fact, the Raptors are playing 4 bench guys at once, and it's a super, super weird lineup. And they're winning with that. We saw them win 2 shifts last night, both in the second quarter and in the fourth quarter, with a combination of Gary Trent alongside Malachi Flynn, Precious Achiuwa, Chris Boucher, and Christian Koloko. It's very weird, but it's working so far. And I wanted to hear if either of you had thoughts on how this new bench combo is going.
So it's actually their second most used lineup over the last 2 games.
Okay, there you go. They're
after
playing
the
well.
starting 5. And it's in an obviously very small sample size of 12 minutes together, a net rating of plus 59.2 per 100 possessions. Now, again, 1, small sample size. 2, not exactly a murderer's row of opponents on the other side. They've done this against largely the Hornets bench and the Blazers bench. So we'll see if they can keep it up. But, I mean, as silly as it seems, or maybe as nonsensical as it seems, I think you just have to take the positive at this point because this team has been so starved for positive bench minutes, for depth, for lineups that can function without both or at least one of Fred or Pascal on the court. And if they have stumbled into a lineup that allows those guys to sit an extra few minutes, like I think you actually mentioned it on your postgame show last night, but they didn't have to bring Pascal back into the game last night until what, the 6-minute mark of the fourth quarter? When this season, in a game the Raptors are actually in the game or end up winning, have they been able to do that?
Right.
Maybe never. So it's hard for me to say whether I actually believe in this lineup because in theory, when I'm thinking about like all of Boucher, Achua, and Koloko on the court, and then Flynn as well, who I haven't been impressed with.
Oh, buddy.
Like,
I got some bad Malachi stats for you.
If I look at that lineup, my gut reaction is just, well, it'll survive as long as Gary Trent can carry them, basically, with his shot making. But then you look at a game last night, and it's like, well, that wasn't really the case. They survived kind of with their energy and what they were doing defensively. And yes, some Gary shot making too, but a lot of what they were doing on the other end and pure energy. And maybe against a lot of bench units out there, they can actually survive because you don't need them. Again, plus 59 per 100 possession is just a joke. Like, that's insane. You don't need them to do that. If they can even play their minutes even or close to it with the way the Raptors starters usually perform, like that will keep them in games. And that's all they need from a bench unit right now. Like they're so starved for competent bench play.
Just being relentless on the glass too, right? Like that was how they survived with a lot of those lineups last season where they were playing pretty much all 6'9" guys with no traditional point guard out there as they just hammered the offensive glass and they kind of made it work. But they've pretty much done that the last couple of games. Precious Achiuwa also shoots 3 for 3 from deep last game where I think he'd hit 5 threes all season coming in. So again, that helps.
That really helps.
Not necessarily something you can bank on every game, but man, if he can find that 3-point stroke, like that was so huge for him down the stretch last season.
Immediately after he had 2 drives that should have had circus music behind them.
It can only ever be a roller coaster with him. You just got to ride it.
No, he chooses the most chaotic option possible. Like even yesterday, he had a drive where he attacked a closeout. The ball like squirted above his head somehow. He collected, grabbed it, took 2 steps, and then dunked the ball. And I was like, how did this play happen? But that's kind of that style. And I think, you know, your point about the possession battle is really starting to, you know, bear out because I think for a lot of parts of this season, the Raptors weren't using the same formula or able to replicate the same formula that got them successful last year. And I think that, you know, right now, especially with the way Nick is choosing to deploy them, because he could easily just go with Precious and Chris as your 4-5, which worked last year. But instead, he's actually using them as your 4 and the 3 with Christian Koloko also at the center. Now what you have, and he's using them in a zone as well. So it's like he's making this very simple for them, right? You have these certain spots, you go to these spots, and then you like go protect the basket. And of course, rebounding is a bit of an issue when you're in a zone, but it's not an issue when you have 3 super athletic, you know, front court guys out there at once. And you essentially have all 3 of these guys stationed either 1 in the paint and then 2 on the baseline. You're blocking a lot of shots with that group. And also at the same time, you're winning a lot of offensive rebounds. And listen, the offense is not the way that group is going to win, right? Gary Trent might get his way into a couple of shots here or there. It would really help if Malachi wasn't 4 of 29 on the field from the last 7 games. 4 of 29. But at the same time, you have this like solid foundation with those 3 front court guys. And my question is just like, is it going to be more sustainable against better opposition? Because like, let's be honest, like who's the best bench player they've seen against Portland or against Charlotte?
Yeah. And that's the thing. And it's not even, I think about what Cash was saying about how they were able to roll with that bench and keep the starters' minutes, all of them basically under 36 minutes. And I wonder if they would have had the conviction to do that if it was like the exact same score, exact same situation, but they were playing like a quality team. You know what I mean? Where it almost felt like last night, it's like, okay, we're going to do this. If we can't beat the Hornets keeping our starters' minutes under 36, then what are we even doing here?
Yeah, fair.
You know what I mean? So like they could afford to give it a little bit longer leash because they know the opponent they're playing is not a totally serious opponent. And it's either going to be...
Hornets are giving poor Steve Clifford an ulcer, man. Jesus.
Oh.
I'm sorry. They're the worst team in basketball right now. Like that's... And specifically, they're the worst defense in basketball right now. So...
Aren't they also last in offense?
They're either last or close to it in offense.
Damn.
But that's like... They played a lot of the season without LaMelo. And with him back, I think they're a lot better than that. But point being, it's like, okay, here are your 2 options. Either you ride this out.
Yeah.
You know, you keep the starters' minutes down and you can win because... you know, you're playing a poor opponent, or you can't and you lose, and then you have some real decisions to make because, again, if you can't beat the Charlotte Hornets, the worst team in the NBA, while playing your starters less than 36 minutes, then you're not a good team.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do wonder if they were playing, like the Celtics or the Bucks or the Knicks, even like any just, quality opponent, would they have felt comfortable rolling with that unit for as long as they did? I do think Gary deserves a ton of credit for keeping them afloat offensively.
Yeah.
I also do wonder whether it is sustainable when the competition ramps up.
I'd say it's not, but no, but I think you could say that for a lot of teams, right?
Yeah, sure.
Like, we know the Raptors have issues when it comes to depth and finding functional bench lineups. Like, there's no excuse. That's just what it is. But I'd also say in their defense that I think most teams in the NBA would say we're more comfortable rolling out this funky bench lineup for longer stretches against Charlotte and maybe Portland than we are against Boston and Milwaukee. So from that perspective, I don't think that's necessarily a fatal flaw.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more interested, like, can they repeat anything close to this against the other kind of average to below average teams in the NBA? Because if they can do that, that's half the league. Like, if this weird, funky bench lineup can tread water or do better than that half the nights, like, you're winning.
Yeah, and look, listen, there's two approaches I think that you can really take towards your bench, right? You can take one approach, which I think Nick took at the start of the year, where it's like, which of these bench guys can come in and supplement and try to play the same style as the starters, right? And you try to keep it going, and you have like 3 starters on the floor at once, and you take, some bench guys, and you just kind of keep that ball rolling. And it just really didn't feel like the Raptors had those guys. Each time they tried to do that, the level of play would just keep dropping. The other approach, which is what they're kind of doing the last 2 games, is just you have a bench grouping, and you give them one starter who obviously is like a, very combustible scorer in Gary, who, by the way, in the last 9 games is averaging 23 points per game on 47% shooting from the field, 44 from 3, 91 from the free throw line. And he's getting to the free throw line, which is a new element to his game this season. But you have this sort of essentially this bench grouping where they can sort of play together, and it's sort of like an entire curveball kind of look. And that's where I'm curious to see Nick continue to go to it. I think he will. Obviously, the returns have been positive so far through 2 games. But he is essentially just throwing a junk lineup out there where it's like, and I mean junk in like a nice way, like a nice junk
or a knuckleball.
Yeah, it's a knuckleball lineup, exactly, right? So you have these 3 centers who are playing for you in a zone, and they're just going to win the paint and just at least try to do that. And I think it's also interesting to me that Nick has chosen, out of all the guys to sort of carry that group, he's chosen Gary to do it. That almost makes me feel like right now, Gary's
the Kyle.
Is he like he's like a secondary option. You know what I mean? Like, because essentially that's what you're always trying to ask for. Obviously, Pascal's the first option. There's no doubt about that. But who's the second option for me on the Raptors? I have no idea, right? But I think of late, when you're choosing for Gary to be the guy featured with that group, that's what you would usually do with Kyle, who used to be the secondary option.
Yeah.
What do you made of Gary in that role?
I think it actually makes a lot of sense. And I was going to say, the reason I think Nurse and the coaching staff might have found something here with this formula is because, like, if you remember coming into the year, right, Gary was supposed to be the 6th man. And we all talked about why his game translates so well to that 6th man type of role. He is a combustible scorer.
Mm-hmm.
He's more of a gambler on defense, but a gunner.
You can gamble if you got 3 shot blockers.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you've got a gambler on the perimeter with 3 big men behind him.
Mm-hmm.
A gunner and a gambler package is the ultimate 6th man. And also, when you look at that bench, like, we're talking about Koloko, Achua, and Boucher. And then, like, you mentioned Flynn's shooting numbers. I mentioned how unimpressed I've been by him. You could say their next best bench player is probably Thad Young. We haven't talked about a competent guard yet. And so this is why I think it actually makes sense that if they've just accepted, like, we do not have any good guards outside of our 2 starters in Fred and Gary, why not have the one that is actually most suited to a bench role, the one that we wanted to be the 6th man coming into the year anyway, serve as a kind of quasi 6th man, even though he's a starter, and he can carry these weird, funky bench lineups with his scoring. I think that formula might actually work, where it's Gary starts, but you also, you stagger the rotations in a certain way where he's carrying these otherwise guardless bench lineups. Given the way this roster is constructed, that might be the only formula to end up with a competent bench.
I think it also says to me that they kind of trust Gary to create his own offense more than they trust Fred to do that right now.
Which makes sense, by the way, just based on the numbers and stats.
It does. It's not what I would have expected coming into the season, but that has certainly played out so far this year. So I think that's part of what it says. And to the point about Flynn, I think the last time I was on this show, we were talking about his role, and I was actually kind of advocating for him to have a longer leash because.
Well, Nick is, to that point, Nick has been super patient.
Absolutely. I give him credit for that.
Yeah.
And, at the end of the day, regardless of whether it's going to be Flynn or somebody else, it was never going to be tenable to keep playing Fred that many minutes, right? Like I thought we're going to run him into the ground. I don't know how much we can tie his struggles to physical attrition, but it's not, it's not and never was going to be sustainable to be playing him, upwards of 38 minutes a game. And so one way or another, they need to find a solution to that. And again, I give Nick credit for being patient with Malachi because that's what I've been feeling like he needed, like just a longer runway to maybe play through some struggles and some mistakes and like build up some rhythm and confidence. And he's been given the space to do that. And yeah, I don't know anymore. Like it's been tough. He's not really finding that rhythm that you would have hoped that he would have found with that, extra kind of patience and playing time. And I think what's frustrating to me about it is the value that he's providing is not really anything that he's doing with the ball in his hands. Like the value that he's providing is mostly as a spot-up shooter, which is important for this team that is starved for it. And he has for most of the season been shooting over 40% from three. But it does make me wonder if maybe you can just, obviously if Otto Porter had been healthy, that would have been great, right? Like he could have been that guy who's providing that spacing without, maybe compromising you to the same extent at the other end of the floor that Malachi is. But it just seems like maybe they can find somebody else to fill that role. And the surplus ball handling that you would have hoped to be getting with Flynn as part of those transitional lineups hasn't really been there. Like he's not creating a ton of advantages off of the bounce. Like the pick and roll game that we thought was going to be the staple, of his play as a complementary guard in the NBA hasn't really borne out. And I think that's been the most frustrating thing.
Yeah, and that's when we were here last time and when I was talking about why I wasn't, not that I didn't think he deserved a chance. I thought he at least deserved a chance, but the reason I didn't believe he'd be able to do anything with it is, look, it's no fault of his own. It's just whether due to his size or some sort of physical limitations, he does not create those advantages on the offensive end. And this is something I've talked about before, where it's like if you, as a guard in the NBA, cannot consistently create advantages for yourself or your teammates, like when you're handling the ball, it's kind of going nowhere. And on the other end, you're being taken advantage of because of your size. Like, where's the value, right? Like, Fred is a small guard, but Fred is a defensive beast for his size and does so much off the ball, offensively, defensively, that the fact that he's undersized and maybe can't finish inside or do it, doesn't matter because he's creating advantages another way. He's not being taken advantage of on the defensive end. With Malachi, those are very real issues. And I just, again, nothing against him, but I struggled to see a role for him going forward as an NBA rotation player.
Yeah, and they're giving them this chance. Like, they literally, the front office was like, Delano, you're going down to the G League.
Yeah.
Nick doesn't even have the option to play you. Maybe Jeff Doughton, who's going to shuttle up and down, is there as a reserve just in case anything happens. You never know, right? But, when people are saying, like, yo, Jeff Doughton needs to get a look now, it's just like very much, I think, the subtext to me is just like they're giving Malachi this chance. And look, I was super happy for him, man. I literally interviewed him. It was like I was talking to him about, like, hey, you're playing really well. You're getting this chance. I hope you really keep it going. And I think literally since the interview, he's 4 of 29, which is
Raptors
tough.
Show curse.
It might be a curse. I don't know. But
to be clear, I'm also not willing to go quite where Cash just went in terms of saying he doesn't have a place as an NBA rotation player. I don't know that he has that place with this team because to talk about the pick and roll stuff that I mentioned and how that's what he came into the league as. Like that was what he was supposed to be. Is like this pick and roll savant, right? This Raptors team doesn't have the personnel to maximize that, I don't think. Like, they don't really have a roll man. I was saying to Cash even before we came on, like, Fred VanVleet's kind of the go-to pick-and-roll screener on this team. Like, their thing is to run inverted action with guys like Pascal and sometimes OG and Scottie handling the ball, and their smaller guys screening and flaring out to the three-point line. Like, they don't have a traditional rim runner who's setting screens and rolling hard to the rim and drawing in defenders with his vertical gravity. Like, that just doesn't really exist on this team, and that makes it very hard for a pick and roll guard or a theoretical pick and roll guard like Malachi Flynn to kind of find his footing.
Yeah, last Tuesday, Blake was in here, and he dropped the stat that
Yeah, my jaw hit the floor when
Chris
I heard
Boucher
that
didn't
stat.
have a single made roll basket, like roll to the set a screen, roll to the rim, pocket pass, lob pass, whatever it is, shovel pass. He didn't have.
Now he's got 2.
He hasn't
both
had
last
he
night.
didn't have a single one for half the season, and then apparently he had one against the Bucks, which no one remembers any baskets from that game outside of what Gary was doing and what Scottie was doing. And then one last night where he actually rolled to the rim for an and one. But I think it is forcing other guys to sort of play in different roles too. That's why you're seeing Precious like go on his little adventures, and we got to live through that a little bit. But like honestly, if Malachi was like more effective offensively in this role with that group, maybe you would see Precious sticking more to a catch and shoot or attacking a closeout kind of thing. But ultimately, look, I like that they're giving Malachi this chance because at least now we can see definitively what we have, right? And he gave him chances when he was playing well, which is obviously easy to do. He's still giving him chances when he's not playing well, which is obviously not easy to do. So, I mean, a couple interesting things happening with the Raptors, and I tried my very best to highlight some of the positives after this thrilling 2-game win streak over one very mid team and one very bad team. But on the other side of this break, we're going to go through an exercise because everyone wants to essentially take the Raptors apart and trade some pieces. And I wanted to ask you guys who you guys would want to move if you had to move one. So we're going to take a break. I've been your host, Bolu. You've been listening to The Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. Welcome back to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. I'm your host, Wim Lua. Continue to be joined by Joseph Cacharo and Joe Wolfon of The Score. Listen to Pound the Rock. Oh, by the way, I forgot to get to this in the first half, but Alex left me a note because he was diligently producing this episode. It says to say shout out to Cash's parents, Frank and Maria. What's going on? What's going on, Frank and Maria? How you doing?
Well, yeah, Alex, we had a birthday party for Ash,
Yep.
from the old Score. And anyway, Alex left his phone in the Uber. And this was right before the holidays.
Right.
So then Christmas Eve, I had to take his phone to wherever I was going, and I was at my parents' place, and he had to come pick his phone up. So then he stopped in, had an espresso and perhaps a beverage with my dad, and yeah.
What beverage?
Can we say that on air?
Yeah, why not?
I think we had a couple cognacs, baby.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Damn.
Nice.
I got to leave my phone in your Uber sometime.
Yeah,
Sounds
I was
like
going to
a great
say,
time.
actually, that sounds great. No, listen, I just having been at Cash's house, it just there's a certain hospitality that comes with being in a Cacharo household. You know what I mean? You're probably gonna get a really nice espresso drink. You might even get a Negroni here or there.
A couple cognacs. I make a
yeah.
mean Negroni.
Yeah, so good. All right, just that Southern Italian hospitality. It's a real thing.
It is.
It's a real thing.
You've been.
I've been.
You were there
I
this
was
past
there.
summer, weren't you?
I was at everywhere except for Calabria, unfortunately. Next time, though. Next time, go to Calabria and Sicily. Honestly, I love Southern Italy quite a bit. Okay.
Go on, you got anything to add?
I'm just anxiously awaiting my invite, man. Seems like everybody's
Just
been to
drop
the
the phones,
Cacharo
man.
household but me.
See, this is an invite right
you
here.
you
This
were
is
there.
an
We
invite.
the first at my place. You were at my place. So the first week they had the show. Remember?
Oh, that's right.
That's true.
We did
That's
the live
right.
You
recording.
did make me a delicious espresso.
That was a very behind the scenes. That was a very chaotic podcast recording. As someone who used to self-produce, obviously now we have a whole production team, and I don't have to worry about that as much. But yeah, we went to your house and we had 4 people sitting around Cash's kitchen island or something like that, and we each had our own laptops and each had our own mics, and we were all like selectively muting when one person was speaking so that it wouldn't overlap. It was an awful experience, and I had to send all the files to our producer Derek, who was probably just like, "What are you guys doing? You guys have just had him in studio or something. It's so much easier here." But anyway, yeah, appreciate you guys. It's a roundabout way of saying Pound the Rock has always been a longtime supporter of the Raptors Show. So,
and vice versa. Right back at you.
yeah, of course. Okay, all right. We are gonna now take apart the team. All right, no more positivity. Positivity is over. All right, we just talked about how great they looked on the bench. They're playing all these centers. We're taking apart the team.
Was
now.
that positivity?
I tried. I was like, hey, season high, 32
until we got to the
assists.
Flynn talk. I think it was pretty positive.
Yeah, fair. Okay, so my assignment to you guys was to, if you have to, move one starter from this group before the trade deadline or at the trade deadline. Who would it be? So, yeah, Cash, I'll start with you. Who'd you pick, and why?
It's tough because, I mean, look, if you're asking if I absolutely had to move,
Yeah.
It,
This is not saying Cash says
yeah, I know.
we are trading whoever.
I know.
Right? This is
I guess,
you know.
if you phrase it like that, it probably ends up. It has to be Gary because,
Okay.
like, Pascal and Scottie to me are the only two like surefire. I want them around for whatever is being built here. OG's probably next in line for me. Now, the one thing I will say with OG is if the reports are true about, the 3 first, like the reports that he can get something in the neighborhood of a DeJounte Murray, Donovan Mitchell package, then look, then we might have to do the Liverpool fans or the Arsenal fans, a famous meme, time to go.
Oh, shouts to whoever that was.
So, I want OG to stay, but if that's the package, then it might be time for that meme. But no, and then Fred, I think there are a lot of questions with the next contract and stuff, but I still do think that on balance, in terms of everything he does on an NBA court, Fred's probably more valuable game to game than Gary is. Plus, when you consider the contract Gary's about to sign, which, don't get me wrong, he's earned that, and his shot creation and shot making and tough shot making on this team in particular are extremely valuable. But the way I'd view it is that in an ideal world, if you start to construct this team in a more functional way going forward, that you shouldn't be as desperate for his shot creation and shot making going forward. And therefore, when you consider the deal he's about to sign, and I think they can replace what he does easier than some of those other guys, he'd be the guy.
What kind of deal do you think he's going to be in line to sign, Gary?
I mean,
I'd say like 4 years, $100 million is like the floor of what he's going to get.
A floor.
The floor, yeah.
So you'd expect that or higher.
Well, we saw Tyler Hero sign for $30 million more than that. I think Tyler Hero's a better player.
Hero's better than Gary Trent.
Okay, but is he $30 million better?
I don't necessarily think that that's the way that you should be looking at it as like, oh, is he 30 million? Like, because the Heat needed to retain him no matter what.
Yeah, no, that's fair. He had all the leverage in the world. And to be honest, Tyler's having a nice season for Miami. Like,
he's been great.
He's been great. But I mean, similar types of players. I mean, you could put Jordan Poole in that conversation as well.
I will say, I think
both those guys are way better playmakers than Gary is.
That's fair. That's fair.
Straight up.
So how much do you think Gary gets?
I mean, 400 sounds about right. Pegging that as the floor seems aggressive to me, but I could see him. Like, what was the Buddy Hield contract a couple years back? I know it's a different cap environment.
That ended up being a bargain because, like, Buddy Hield for next year.
It was like 480?
Yeah.
It was like 488 or something.
Next year, he's declining. Under contract for less than 20. Like 19.
Yeah, because it was a declining game.
But the thing I'd say with Gary is that, and I think you can make the argument for a lot of these guys, and I think the front office might agree, even if you look at Masai Ujiri's track record, is that maybe you just sign him and you retain the asset. I know we don't like talking about players as assets and things, but that's the way you look at it from a business perspective. Like, you just retain the asset and then you make a move later.
Which,
because
by the way, has always
tradable.
That's always been the way that Masai
That's
has
what I'm
operated.
saying. The track record, shows that. So again, if preferably that's the way I'd go about it. But for the purposes of this exercise, really have to trade one.
Yeah.
Gary would be the guy.
No, that's fair. I think the question you got to ask yourself is, like, what can you get for Gary right now? If you're not committed to Gary long term, what can you get for him right now? And how much is that value right now as compared to if you had re-signed him to a 4-year, let's just say 4 years, 100, because I think that is a reasonable deal for him. Could you get more for Gary when he's on a 4-year, $100 million deal than can you get for him right now as an expiring, making 16, 17, And
that is the question.
I think you might be able to, just given his age.
Okay, well then retain him.
Yeah.
It's clearly he fits. I think that's the part for me where it's like when Nick was talking about, you either fit us or you don't, which, by the way, I mean, don't say that. That's kind of rude. At least not publicly. Just no need. Like, what was the need for saying that? Now we could just quote this over and over again. But, I think that question's been answered. He fits. In fact, right now, the Raptors are essentially using him as a number 2 option. Yep. So he clearly fits.
I'd also say kudos to Gary for taking those comments in stride, coming out and playing better since then. And also, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he made a comment at the time essentially saying, like, he's fine with getting that kind of criticism because he understands, like, he hasn't done anything in the league yet. I'm pretty sure it was him.
That's exactly what he said. Yeah.
And not every player is wired that way. So again, just kudos to him for taking it in stride like that, taking it as constructive criticism, looking at it as like, there's still a lot more I can do and prove in this league. And so far this season, going out and doing it and proving it.
Yeah, I recommend everybody who is watching or listening to this show, after you listen to the show, go listen to the Raptors practice scrum today. Gary Trent Jr. spoke. And there was a lot of questions about sort of his role, and obviously he's playing well right now, so the questions were positive. But his approach towards that interview and sort of the answers that he was giving and how serious he was about sort of putting in the work and being positive regardless of what the results are, it was very, very refreshing to hear. I actually really enjoyed and appreciated Gary's interview there. Okay, so anyway, you're moving Gary. That's fine. Joe?
Well, yeah, I mean, just to quickly piggyback on that, I think Gary deserves a ton of credit, not only for taking that kind of criticism in stride, but really focusing on rounding out his game and, like, improving in the areas he needs to.
Is he not slightly passing better?
Yeah, maybe slightly.
Okay.
Like, that's clearly.
I will take slightly.
That's fine. That's clearly still a deficiency in his game, right?
Right.
And that doesn't have to matter if you're just, either like a bench gunner or you are like a 2-guard who's being asked to be a play finisher and not necessarily have to initiate or even connect possessions. Like, if he continues scoring the way that he has been, where, like, his 2-point percentage right now is by far the highest of his career, a lot of that, it's not so much like getting to the rim and finishing at the rim more, though I think he's been, like, a little bit better at that.
Apparently he's shooting 71% within, like, 0 to 3 feet at the basket, which is very high for him, obviously.
But to me, just watching, I feel like it's the kind of in-between stuff that's been so much better. Like, much better floater game, like a little bit more accurate from the mid-range, getting to the free throw line more than he ever has before. So a more well-rounded scorer, maybe he was passing a little bit better and a little bit more willingly than he has in the past, but that's, like, still a clear weakness to me. But as a scorer, I do think he's made meaningful strides this year, and that's been really nice to see. My answer to this question, and maybe it's going to sound like a bit of a cop-out, because honestly, if it were up to me, I think I would strongly consider trading both Gary and Fred.
Okay.
Because as I have said to Cash before, I think the way that I am conceptualizing this, looking at the rest of this season and toward the future, is the goal should be to maximize the competitive window where ideally the primes of Siakam and Barnes overlap.
Okay.
And I don't know when exactly that's going to happen, but you hope that there's going to be a scenario, a couple-year window maybe, where Pascal's still in his prime and Scottie is kind of entering his.
Sure.
And OG could be there as well and be part of that. But in order to maximize that, I think what they need is like a legitimate lead guard. And Fred is a fantastic complementary guard who I think, under the right circumstances, could still fit that core exceptionally well. But I don't know that you can actually, like, is there a path to acquiring that type of lead guard with Fred still around in terms of like the cap sheet, but also like the assets that would be required to go and get that player? That's what I'm not sure about. So if you're thinking about, a couple of contracts that you might not want to pay beyond this season, and then also, if you're not willing to pay them, do you just try and get what you can for those guys right now? I would think about trading both of them, getting as much back as you can in terms of prospects, draft capital, and being as well equipped as you can possibly be to like make that Godfather offer for whatever type of, Donovan Mitchell type of lead guard becomes available in the future. Like you want to have that type of player to pair with Siakam and Barnes and maybe Anunoby moving forward. The answer then, if you are only going to trade one of them, is which one can you get more for?
That's it.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that, but that's what it comes down to.
Do you think teams might look at it like Fred he's won a championship. He's shown to be a positive presence in your locker room, right? He has shown to be successful both on and off ball. Off ball this year, less so, but I think in the past, obviously, he's been very successful off ball. Do you think that they see that and value that more than right now, which is obviously Gary shooting a lot better than Fred?
I guess it depends on the team.
Okay.
But in a lot of situations, I would say, yeah, probably they would. Gary's also quite a bit younger.
Yeah.
And maybe teams view him as being on the upswing, whereas Fred is maybe.
It almost looks like he's on the downswing a little bit. Just from the outside looking at it.
I think the shooting, I keep saying this and it keeps not happening, but I do think eventually the shooting will rebound.
Yeah.
But in terms of, the point of attack defense, things like that, I don't know. I think it's very possible that we have seen Fred VanVleet play his best basketball already. And that doesn't mean that he's going to fall off completely and that what we've seen from him this season is his new baseline, his new normal. But I think teams wouldn't necessarily be wrong to view it that way and think that there's a little bit more upside long-term with Gary there than there is with Fred. Now, I think Fred is a much more complete player overall. If I was a team chasing a championship right now, Fred is the guy that I would look to acquire. But again, I think it totally depends on the team and sort of how, like, this is just completely off the top of my head, and I don't think necessarily either of those guys are the type of player that a team like the Grizzlies would look to acquire. But I think that's a team where, yeah, they're competing right now, but also their core is young. And so maybe they would think of Gary as the type of player who could grow with that core more so than Fred. And again, I don't think that's the type of team that's going to be looking.
They already have Desmond Bane, yeah.
But I just mean like a team with a bit of a longer runway, whereas like, I don't know, the Lakers, who could potentially talk themselves into getting back into that competitive mix this season, I think they might prioritize somebody like Fred, who has that championship experience, who does really know how to play off ball and could be a great complement to LeBron James. Like that's why I say it kind of depends on the team and what their priorities are in the short and long term.
Yeah, that's fair. I only have like 3 minutes for this, but my answer, if I had to move one of the starters, I'm looking at sort of like right now, how do you maximize Pascal Siakam's window? And to me, one of the clear problems is, and this is a problem whether or not they draft someone that helps them next year or not, because I don't really think that outside of drafting Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson, none of those guys are coming into the year and changing your bottom line. Maybe 3-4 years down the line when they develop and grow, that's different. But the problem to me right now is that the Raptors have two huge weaknesses, and they need to trade from a position of strength to address those weaknesses. And there's not a lot of players on the team that can get you back to starter level players or even a starter level player and then a rotation caliber level backup. And to me, when I'm looking at all those factors putting together, I'm looking at OG Anunoby, who is obviously very painful to part with somebody who you've grown to this point, who is a very effective three-point shooter. We saw that last night, obviously knocking down 6 threes, who can guard any position in the league, and he's your shutdown wing, and he's on the floor so that Pascal doesn't have to guard anybody like that, and that Scottie doesn't have to guard anybody like that. And the point is, though, that's where he actually has that value. When I look around the league, a Denver Nuggets, with OG Anunoby, they might be the favorites out of the West, right? A Memphis Grizzlies with OG Anunoby, they might be the favorites out of the West. You know, you look at, just you go across the board, the Golden State Warriors, right? Like all of these teams, the Cavs.
Oh my God, the Cavs are so starved for small forward minutes.
Exactly. Every single contender wants to go OG Anunoby, and his contract is low enough right now at about $17 million, where there's enough salary that they can sort of piece together to sort of get back a guy like OG. And so that's why you hear OG's trade value being that high. You could get prospects, and you could probably get 1 or 2 guys who can benefit your rotation right now, right? Because the comparable was the Donovan Mitchell package. Not only did the Donovan Mitchell package include 3 unprotected picks, it included Lauri Markkanen, who's obviously been a huge contributor in the mix for All-Star, and also even a Colin Sexton, right? And that's the kind of thing I would look for right now. If you were to try to move one of the starters, which is this exercise, that's what essentially you would look for, right? Obviously, there's a better case for trading Fred because he's underperforming. There's a better case for trading Gary because I think that these guys are both, about to walk in free agency if you don't obviously pay them. But with OG, you have to think about, okay, if you keep OG around and you move forward next year and he still stays the same kind of player with the demand around him, would it surprise you if OG Anunoby made the max? And at that point, would you want to pay OG Anunoby the max?
Yeah,
right?
No,
so you might have to be very prudent and look at this specific situation. I am not personally advocating the Raptors should trade OG Anunoby. Yeah. In this exercise, though, what makes the most sense to me would probably be that because of the fact that he brings you back the most in return. I'm not trying to trade somebody to get rid of them as a problem. I'm trying to trade somebody to get the most back in return. He's that guy right now.
Yeah, and the Raptors, if they want to get back into title contention, they need to get creative in finding answers. If they want to get into title contention anytime soon, with, to your point, or I can't remember which one of you said it now, the Siakam and Barnes primes overlapping, then you got to get creative and make a move like that in the next year or 2 max. So OG is the best option for that.
Yeah. And we talked about this when you were on Pound the Rock a few weeks back about how, you don't want to trade OG Anunoby, but you also have to come to grips with the fact that there's a good chance that he's never going to have more trade value than he does right now on this contract.
Yeah.
And if you want to dramatically remake the roster, that's not a bad way to go about doing it. I just think about what the Raptors defenses looked like this year, and then I imagine what it would look like without OG, and I quiver a little bit.
I feel you on that.
Charlotte Hornets-esque.
All right, that does it for us today. I've been your host, Will Lou, and you've been listening to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. Thanks again to Joseph Gashar and Joe Wolfon. Thanks to our board producer, Derek Brandale and Jennifer Rolnick for helping us with the YouTube stream. We'll be back tomorrow.